Hello, this is Jordan with Andalusia Knits, and today I am confessing my knitting sins. So first off, hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I'm happy to have you. This is kind of an odd episode to begin with because normally on this channel I am talking about knitting that I am excited about and knitting that I am proud of, and that is the exact opposite of what you're going to find here today. But once again, you're welcome to stick around and see all of my knitting failures. And if you are a returning visitor, a returning viewer, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. Things might look a little bit different here. I've slightly altered the angle of my filming setup, and that was because in the last pretty much every video I filmed so far, there's just something about like the video quality that was just not quite like crisp enough or clear enough, like based on what I knew the capabilities of my phone's camera was. And so at first I thought, oh, there's some like setting on the phone that I've enabled that is messing things up. And so I've clicked and tried and tested everything, and I don't think it's the phone at this point. I think it is. I wasn't using enough light. So basically, before this video, I had a single O light that I was using to light these videos, but now I've got it going. I got some lamps going. I got some window action going. So hopefully things already look a little nicer and brighter for you. On my end, I think they definitely do. Apologies in the back for my music library. It is not the neatest, and that is after me like cleaning it up to make it look neater for this video. So it is it's an improvement for the video, but it still looks pretty crazy now that I'm seeing it on camera. But anyways, I'm sure that none of you care nearly as much about any of the lighting issues I'm having as I do. So we will move on to the meat of this episode, and that is discussing my knitting fails and my knitting sins. And I am drawing a distinction between those two things, between my fails and my sins, because as I was pulling out stuff to talk about in this video, I noticed that while I have a lot of things that contain technical errors, not all of them like upset me or get me all twisted up in the way that some of them do. And so those things where I have like made some sort of technical mistake out of ignorance because I just didn't know any better, I wasn't aware of a technique at the time or something, those those don't bother me, but those I would consider my like technical failures or my knitting fails. Whereas my knitting sins are like, I want to call it a moral failing. I don't think that moral failing is the word I need to use for knitting, but it's like a pattern. It's like my sins are where like there's some sort of lesson I need to learn that is just not quite sticking. And so I make the same mistake over and over and over again. And while the technical fails are not infuriating, the knitting sins are absolutely infuriating. I cannot believe how much material I had to pull from to make this video. It's insane. Like, I had to cut things out. I was like, I hope I have enough to talk about. And then I'm sitting with like an entire bed full of bad knitting projects. So I got plenty to talk about, and I'm going to start with my knitting sins. They sort of fall into three specific venial, I guess, no, these are mortal sins. These are not venial sins. These are very serious sins. But three like main issues that I kept running into with my knitting. And so I'll start with the sins first, and then at the end of the video, I'll go into some of my more like neutral fails that like, even though they're messed up, like it doesn't bother me. It's fine. I still use these things all the time and I love them. So at least we'll end on sort of a high note, even if we're still ending on things that are technically wrong with my knitting. But yeah, so let's get started with the first sin of mine, which is probably a sin that you and a lot of other knitters also have, and that is the sin of impatience. So the knitting sin of impatience is one that I'm sure you're probably familiar with. Like a lot of knitters, I find that the slow, meditative, like pace of knitting, on the one hand, is very nice and relaxing, but at the same time, it's a matter of like I never am knitting as fast as I want to be knitting, and so nowadays I can sort of push through that feeling and it'll be okay. But as like an early inexperienced knitter, I just could not take the pain of like sitting down and knitting a project to its appropriate length because it just felt so interminably long because I was a terrible knitter. Obviously, as a beginner, you're not going to be like great right out of the gate, and you're not going to be speeding through the knitting right out of the gate, but that was unacceptable to me. And so I end up with just, this is such an embarrassing string of hats that I knit. These are some of my earliest hats that I knit. They're all chunky weight. I'm assuming these are all acrylic. I cannot tell you what kind of yarn this is specifically. They're so old. But look at how short every last one of these is. Hat number 1 doesn't hit the earlobes. On to hat number 2, doesn't hit the earlobes, although I really do like this color, and I did sort of like a, I think it's like a berry stitch. It's some sort of seed stitch variation, I'm pretty sure. Great colors, great seed stitch, but once again, hat doesn't fit. Couldn't be bothered to knit it to the correct length. Then we've got this fun little scrappy project where it's just this nightmare collection of acrylic yarns I had. And once again, hat doesn't fit, doesn't hit the earlobes. We're on like hat number 3 at this point. And then we get into the smaller yarns. I've graduated from this point from like chunky weight yarns into like a worsted weight. I think this might be Wool of the Andes worsted weight. But still, once again, have not learned my lesson about knitting the projects to their appropriate length. Because once again, this one almost touches the earlobes, but not quite. And this one also has quite a ridiculous amount of positive ease. But that, I don't feel as upset about the shortness factor. And once again, another worsted weight hat. I think this might be fisherman wool, Wool of the Andes. No, Lion Brand fisherman's wool. And once again, beautiful, cute little stripe design. Doesn't fit. You can see those earlobes. And I mean, I can understand like some people don't want their hats to touch their earlobes. They want this more fitted thing, but I do not. I need the hat to at least go to the earlobe, and I have so many of them. That's just a sampling of them that do not hit me on the earlobe where they need to. So that is a lesson that, like, I don't know if I ever actually internalized it. I won't say that like I am like a-okay with how long and how the lengths I need to knit in my life, but at this point, like, I know to just like push through that, because like, as annoying as the feeling of like the never-ending knitting is, the feeling of like knowing I did a bad job, these finished result hats make me angrier than the just pushing through the tedious amount of knitting would. And so that is my first knitting sin, is that I just couldn't wait to be done with my projects to a detrimental level in my early knitting life, because like I said, I just have so many hats now that, like, I mean, I could give them away. I don't know if anybody would want them. Like I said, a lot of these are my early, really chunky weight beginning hats, but yeah, like, there's just so many hats that I intended to knit and wear myself that I can't, because I couldn't be bothered to knit them to the appropriate length. And so, yeah, that's the first sin I'm confessing, is that I... All right, we're on to stop number 2 in my knitting sins tour. And this is a problem that definitely has caused me issues in my knitting life, and has definitely caused me issues in every other aspect of my life as well. And that is the sin of, you can't tell me nothing. Like, I am so obstinate when it comes to seeking out and listening to good advice. There is just something in me that like needs to do it myself without any external input. And it's a very hard habit for me to shake, and that is going to be exemplified through quite a few different types of errors and issues that I've had in my knitting throughout the years. And so first up, I have a few more hats. We're going to have to burn through some hats. Early in my knitting life, that was like almost exclusively what I was knitting, which is really embarrassing to admit now, because you've seen how many of those hats don't actually fit me. But yeah, a lot of my early knitting life was knitting hats. And starting out, I didn't really have any tools that allowed me to knit in the round, because I mean I was buying like chunky weight yarn and gigantic needles from like the big box stores, and so like they typically didn't have, you know, size 13 like 16-inch circulars. That's not really a thing. That's kind of hard to find. And so a lot of these early hats I would end up knitting flat and seaming together. And seaming mattress stitch, that is the first thing that you can't tell me nothing about, because let's take a look at some of these seaming jobs, and we'll start with the most egregious one, so you can absolutely tell where the seam is without even like disturbing the knitting. And then when you pull it apart, like, look how many rows I skipped. Like there are like inches, there's like an inch between those different seam points. This is crazy. Yeah, did not know how to seam. But at this point, I should have known, hey, okay, so I'm not really good at seaming. I should probably look up how to do that instead of just like stumbling through it again. But that didn't happen. And so we got another hat. And while it is a little bit better, it is still pretty crazy. The colors are kind of dark. I don't know if you'll be able to see the horrific seam job here. But once again, yeah, absolutely not doing it correctly. Supposed to be an invisible seam, but it is clearly visible. Once again, can't tell me nothing. And here we go, hat number 3. And if you've watched my first episode of my podcast, you've seen some of these hats before. I've complained about them before. I have a lot of complaints about them. But once again, yeah, like all it would have taken was to like look up one singular mattress stitch tutorial. It's not like mattress stitch is even the hardest technique that you encounter in knitting, but I could not even be bothered to do that. And so at some point I did finally learn how to like seam stuff together, because those the hats that I just showed in the last sinful segment about being too short, like the seaming on these is much better. Like it's pretty invisible, and it's kind of tricky to do mattress stitch with stripes. So I'm very impressed that I was able to do that. And once again, like we got a little wonkiness going on, but clearly like at some point the message took that I needed to learn how to look up how to do mattress stitch, but it took so much time for me to get to that point, whereas like I should have just like knit one bad one and been like, oh, I need to figure this out before I try again. But I didn't do that, and that is because you can't tell me nothing. And if you thought that seaming was bad, if you thought that was embarrassing, like it is just about to get even more crazy. Like I am really illuminating some of the like faults and foibles of my mind here. And the thing is, I learned how to mattress stitch at some point, because like I said, I showed you a couple of those hats where I did a decent job of the mattress stitch, not a problem. And so then maybe like a year or two after I started knitting, I wanted to try my hand at a garment. And so I knit this sweater, and for whatever reason, I wasn't doing mattress stitch a lot, I guess. I had forgotten how to do it. And instead of just, once again, instead of just like looking up a quick refresher, like a quick single Google search probably would have been able to jog my memory. Instead of doing that, I sat down and knit and seamed this whole thing together without a GD clue of what I was doing. So let's take a look at some of these side seams and why they are not the greatest. Now this is Lion Brand Fisherman Wool, and this is like their marled colorway, where they take like the off-white and the dark brown and twist the plies together. So it's kind of hard to see, but there is a pretty gnarly, uneven seam there that you can really see, like where I just did not pick up everything correctly. And then we've got some interesting choices here on the neckline, where I picked up some stitches incorrectly here. And once again, like all of these things, like the technical faults are minor. It's the fact that I knew that I needed to look up how to do this stuff that really like makes me angry at myself for doing this. But the thing that's kind of craziest and the biggest fail the most was that this is a set-in sleeve construction, and I had no business trying to ease in a sleeve into this armhole. So I'm gonna really do a quick change and put this on and just show you how like 1980s football player these shoulders make me look. So I'll be right back. Don't I look beautiful? Don't I look so right in these pointy shoulders? Doesn't this look like a normal human man sweater to you, because it sure doesn't to me. So yeah, now that I'm putting this on, yeah, these shoulder seams are pretty rotten. I don't know what was going on. And that's exactly what was going on. Is I didn't had no clue what was going on, and so they ended up looking all pointy and weird like this. And I don't know if you've noticed the sleeves super duper long, and then when I like pull them to like an appropriate length, it creates this nice weird like bunching. I feel like a medieval princess or something in this thing. I hate it so much. It could also be due to the fact that it is September in the American South and I have no business wearing wool at this point in the year. But I had to put this on just to show you, just like, there's no redeeming this. And so whenever the first time that I heard about Fix It February or Finish It February from Roxanne Richardson, I was like, oh, that is the perfect thing. I'm gonna undo all of these seams and do them correctly. And I don't think that is ever going to happen. I started it one February, and like, even this, despite the fact that I never wear this sweater, it never gets any sort of like wear and tear. Like the just, it's so sort of like sticky wool that unpicking those seams, it was just near impossible. So I think this is just going to have to remain like a monument to my bad seaming experience. And hopefully, if I ever in the future, now at this point, I don't think I'm going to forget how to do mattress stitch. I finally learned how to do it, and it stuck. But after I had already done this, but yeah, this is a reminder of just look up a tutorial. I know like you want to be in the flow and the knitting is fun, but like it's not going to be fun when you knit an entire GD sweater and you can't even do anything with it because it is just bizarre looking. So that's my warning to all of you out there. Like, I know it's annoying like in the moment to like get out of the flow and like do a little quick reference, but it's going to save you so much heartache in the long run if you do that. Now, last up in the You Can't Tell Me Nothing section, I have some socks because it took me a hot minute to like internalize the correct size and fiber makeup of my socks. And so at first, I think this might have been not so much the sin of you can't tell me nothing as it is the sin of laziness, because a lot of my early socks are just like simply too big for my feet. I'm not going to put them on. I'm not going to show my feet on camera, you perverts. But this is just simply does not fit my foot. And so, like a lot of people, when I knit socks that don't fit correctly, I'm like, oh, well, that's fine. These are going to be a pair of house socks or whatever. But I would argue that like I think my socks might take more wear and tear, like wearing them around the house outside of shoes than they do in shoes, because at least like the shoes like protecting them. It's like an outer layer around it, whereas it's taking the full brunt of the environment if you're just wearing a pair of socks around the house. I don't know. That's just pure speculation on my part. But I was very bad at like knitting to gauge and like trying to figure out or knitting to the correct size and trying to figure out based on my gauge what that size was. And so, yeah, so I have a lot of socks like this that are ruined. My socks, regardless of whether they're knit well or knit badly, but my socks have a tendency to develop holes like along the sides on here, like on the big toe. And I have found that, unfortunately, I absolutely hate darning socks. I don't ever want to do it. I know that I put so much time and effort into knitting socks, but it is so annoying to try to darn these things. And so at this point, I don't darn them anymore. And so like the ones like this that are just like loosey goosey and like, wait, not gonna fit, like I'm just gonna have to throw these away. I wore through these in probably like 6 months to a year, like before they started developing holes. And like I said, once I realized that I cannot be bothered to fix those holes, these are just going to have to be garbage. So like sometimes, yeah, like I was not good at knitting socks to the correct size, but I was also very bad at knitting socks with the correct materials. And so if you watch the last episode of my podcast, I talked about I got an acquisition of some Acadia yarn from the Fiber Company, which is this beautiful, like lovely blend of alpaca and wool and silk noil. And for whatever reason, the first time I saw this yarn, I was like, I gotta make a pair of socks out of that. And at this point, like it could be if you've never knit socks before, you could be ignorant of the fact that, it's nice to at least have like some nylon in there, or if you're going to go the silk route, you want like actual silk thread and not silk noil. The noil's not really going to do anything to reinforce it if it's just like little bumps of it scattered throughout. And so, yeah, I was already aware that like I need to be more mindful of like my fiber choices. But that didn't stop me from buying the Acadia because it was pretty. And so pretty quickly, like the bottom started felting and falling apart. And once again, I tried darning it and realized how annoying that process was. And then just put these socks away, never to think about them or wear them again. So those were some really bad ones. And now I've got some more recent ones where like this was like the last pair of socks before I finally learned every lesson, hopefully, I think I need to successfully knit socks. And so these were an appropriate fiber. They're just 100% wool. There's no nylon, but I found that like knitting them at this very tight gauge sort of helps with the fact that there's no sort of other fibers reinforcing the wool. But at this point, I was still like, I couldn't be bothered to measure my foot. Why could I not just take the 2 minutes it would take to like get the major like foot measurements that I need to create a sock that fits, instead of creating these socks? Oh, I forgot, I'm not putting these on. But instead of creating a sock that like it's just too gigantic. And once again, like the dense gauge has helped them hold up. But once again, I'm getting these holes where the big toes are just like way sooner than I am on my socks where the gauge is correct and the fiber is correct and the fit is correct. So slowly but surely I've learned my lesson on socks, but it's taken me a while to get to the point where I have like a system that is producing socks that are not going to fall apart within a year. Because like I said, like even the good ones, even the ones that I've done everything correctly and they're all nice and perfect and not sinful, I am not going to darn socks. Like it is just, I've tried multiple times and it is very annoying. And it's all has to do with the fact that like you have to like have a hand in there at all times. It's not like something like a flat piece of fabric you can just like lay down and like darn that way. I'm having to like manipulate the needle and the yarn through the entire body of the sock way too much. Just can't be bothered with that. So the only thing I can do to prevent that is to knit socks that actually want to hold up and not fall apart the moment that you look at them the wrong way. Now we have made it to my final sin. And strangely enough, there is only exactly one entry in this section. Because for whatever reason, I pretty quickly learned my lesson that this was not the way to do things. And this final sin that I had was the sin of ironic knitting. And I don't think that all ironic knitting by everyone falls into this category, but in this case, I was definitely leaning into the irony because I was afraid that my skills were not good enough to produce something that I would sincerely enjoy. And so instead of just like leaning into that discomfort and just pushing through that feeling, I just ran in the opposite direction and tried to be all cute and silly. And so now I am burdened, or I don't know, I secretly kind of love this thing, is even though I hate it. I am burdened with this nightmare acrylic vest that I made because wouldn't it be so hilarious if I took all of these yarns that I don't like, and wouldn't it be so funny if they were in colors that I didn't like and don't go together? And wouldn't it be so funny if I took all of that and knit up like the worst vest pattern I could find online? And if I remember the name of this vest pattern, I absolutely would name and shame it because it was a free one and it was terrible. It like the pattern photos were not much better than this. And I picked it specifically because I was like one of the worst vest designs I've ever seen in my life. And I just thought that would be so funny. But really, what I was trying to hedge my bets against was that it was going to be so devastating. Like if I found a vest pattern that I actually liked, and I knit it and I didn't do a good job, it was going to be more devastating to me if that happened. So I went the ironic route. But like I learned this lesson quickly because like knitting, like just back to the impatience thing, knitting just like takes way too long to be working on stuff that you don't genuinely like. And so I'm still, regardless, like I said, I have a perverse love for this, hopefully an unironic love for this now, because yeah, in addition to the irony, there are some other like technical things that like I don't know what in the world I was thinking. So like for example, this is knit flat and seamed, and for whatever reason, the seams are on the outside. Did not mean to do that on purpose. 100% did not mean to do that on purpose. And oh, the sleeves, the armholes. After you've like seamed everything up, it wants you to pick up and knit all the stitches around the hole. I was not familiar with the concept of picking up and knitting, and so I picked up every stitch to the point where like I thought my needles or the yarn was gonna break because I was like picking up all of these like cast on edge stitches before I began knitting a single one instead of picking up one, knitting it, and then going to the next one. So I had some real fun, real tight knitting around the armholes. And then honestly, okay, the one thing that like I need to go back and figure out how I did was these weird seams at the top where I haven't quite traditionally seamed it together, but it looks kind of decorative and it creates a very flat join, which I like. Like this wouldn't work everywhere, but like if there's ever a place where like I need like a flatter join than mattress stitch, this would come in handy, unironically. But yeah, so this is my nightmare vest, and I'll go put it on for y'all since I did the other sweater, but this one might look even worse than the last one, but we'll see. All right, here we go. Doesn't this look so fun? Isn't this so funny? Isn't wearing ugly clothing funny? Isn't having a vest that doesn't have any sort of closure thing funny? Wouldn't it be funny if I tied it up like Daisy Duke? Wouldn't this be so hilarious? Makes you mad. I will never irony knit another thing in my life because of this thing. And I thought I had lost this when I was making this video. This was like number one with a bullet, the thing I wanted to talk about. And it wasn't until yesterday evening that my boyfriend actually pulled it out of the bottom of the closet. A few like months ago, I went through and did end up throwing away a lot of knitting that I'd done earlier that I was never going to use and I didn't like. And I could not remember if I had thrown this away or not. I'm so glad I didn't though. Because like I said, like as infuriating it as it is, like, I don't know, it's still mine. I can't help but love it a little bit, even as nasty and as rotten as it looks, and as nasty and as rotten as the motivation for knitting it was. It could be worse, I guess. I don't know. So now to wrap things up, I thought I would end with some things that I've knit that are technically fails, but are not really sins. So like I said at the beginning, like everything I've shown you so far, it makes me angry because like there's some like knitting lesson that I just was refusing to learn when I was making these mistakes. But there are also pieces I have where I've made technical mistakes, but they don't like get me bent out of shape because, like I said, they were made out of ignorance and not out of like malicious stupidity, like some of these other things. And so they're just things that, like at the time, I was not aware, and because I had never done these techniques before, like how was I supposed to be aware of these things? And so these are the things that like are not perfect, but that I give myself a pass on. And I just wanted to show a few of these so that everyone realizes like this is all in good fun. I don't really hate myself. I don't hate my knitting. I love most of what I did, but yeah, everybody makes mistakes. So I'm gonna start off with a couple pairs of socks. And the first pair we have here is one that, like the other ones you saw, are way too big. They do not fit my foot at all. But I did some pretty amazing color work, at least on the top here with this little design. This is from Alice Starmore's book, Charts for Color Knitting, this little Greeky looking square thing. And the reason I don't hate these, even though they don't fit and I never wear them, is because I also did on the bottom, I did a really bad job at tensioning my stranded colorwork floats. And so I'm not sure if it's really showing on camera, but it creates this sort of like ridged, almost like quilted effect because the floats are not like super duper tight, but they're just a little bit too short. And so it creates this really sort of like pillowy, cushiony fabric. And as I was looking at these, I was like, I absolutely need to do some sort of design where like intentionally short floats are used to create this sort of like cushiony fun little fabric. So yeah, these I don't hate because they are going to lead to hopefully some sort of like new interesting design, and so that's fine. And then I have a recent pair of socks I knit where I did a technical error that I would consider particularly egregious for the fact that I've been knitting for like 6 or 7 years at this point. And that is the fact that on my left-leaning decreases along this gusset here, I was doing the what is it called? Slip knit pass slip stitch over that left leaning decrease, and you're supposed to slip the stitch knitwise. And for whatever reason, I slipped every last one of these purlwise, and this got a pass from me though, because I remember at the time I was knitting this pair of socks, I was working on another project where I was having to slip a lot of stitches purlwise, and I'm pretty sure like I just got confused and just completely forgot that I was working, you know, these decreases and not the other project's decreases or whatever. And so yeah, these stitches are all twisted, but like, I mean, no one's ever going to see this. This is all constantly going to be covered by my shoes. And like I said, like this was just like it was more like a lapse of judgment than an intentional sin or something like that. So yeah, so I've got some socks that are not perfect, but I don't absolutely hate. And then I also I found this hat, this colorwork hat that I knit that I don't absolutely hate either. And while it just barely makes it to the earlobe line. It's long enough. It's officially long enough. But this was my first experience doing stranded color work, and I just was not prepared for the tension difference between the rib knitting and the stranded color work. Like the strands on the inside of the hat just make that body section so much more tighter than the crown decreases or the ribbing. So it's not a particularly comfortable wear, but it's not one that I hate either, because like I said, this was my first time doing stranded color work pretty much basically. And so I just didn't have any knowledge of like those floats or how they're going to affect the tension and the stretchability of the hat. But not to well, actually, yes, to brag, like despite the fact that the floats might be a little too tight for my head, this tension for color work is kind of amazing. That is one thing that I have never really had a problem with sin-wise, is like bad tension and rowing out. And I think that has to do with the fact that I knit English style and I drop the yarn between every stitch. So basically every stitch I make is getting like hand tensioned exactly the same as the stitch that came before it. But there's definitely a trade-off. Like English style is really annoying for doing ribbing. Like anything that involves like having to move the yarn from the back of the work to the front of the work on a regular basis, I hate doing that. But the tension thing, yeah, like if you have tension problems, give English style a try, because that is one thing that has never pissed me off in my knitting before. And so last up for this technical flaw section, I have a sweater that I knit. This was probably, I think I started this in 2023 and finished it in 2024. And this was obviously not my first color work, but this was my first really large scale color work project. And if you've seen the first episode of my podcast, you know what I'm about to pull out. But this is this sweater does not fit to save my life. It is so big. It is like wearing a circus tent, but I love it so much. I can't hate it, even with all its flaws. And it's this giant, colorful monstrosity with all of these circles on the front. My boyfriend calls these Price is Right circles, and I'm a little mad that he does, because he's absolutely right. They absolutely look like they could be on the Price is Right. And then on the rest of the body, we have this like square pattern that's sort of reminiscent of those socks I showed earlier, and that is because these patterns also came from Alice Starmore's book, Charts for Color Knitting. And this is a drop shoulder sweater, and this was another example of like, I made mistakes, but they were mistakes out of ignorance. And I'm going to put this on really quick just to show you what it looks like, and then I'll talk about all the ignorant mistakes I made. All right, well, this isn't terrible. It is very big, as you'll notice. I'll stand up and just show just how big this thing is. It is huge. Like I said, it feels like a circus tent, but I'm not particularly mad at this thing, because on the one hand, I did it this way because I just completely was not prepared for how much the like weight of the color work was gonna stretch under its own weight. So before this sweater, I'd only ever knit single color sweaters or sweaters that didn't involve any sort of stranded color work. And so I was not expecting this to be as heavy as it was, and so it stretches a ton under its own weight when I wear it. And on top of that, the other thing I was ignorant of was that in the knitting world, at least online, oversized sweaters are definitely a thing, and I didn't realize at the time that like oversized sweaters look really good on like thin young women, but like men of a certain age and men of a certain waistline, like I said, we just kind of look like we're wearing circus tents in big oversized sweaters. And so I learned that like the oversized sweater look, that's more of like a ladies fashion thing as opposed to a men's fashion thing. And that if I want to look as like clean and together as I do, I'm gonna need to go with like not obviously not negative ease or zero ease, but like an inch or two at most of ease in my sweaters is the sweet spot for me. And like I said, I had no way of knowing that though, that like that was like more of like a lady. I don't want to be patronized or anything, but like that's definitely more of like a women's style thing than a men's style. You see a lot more big boxy sweaters on women than you do on men, and I've learned firsthand why that is the case. But that being said, I still love this sweater so much. It is probably the sweater I wear around the house the most. Like I said, right now we're still in September in the South, so this is miserable wearing this and talking to you in it. But you know, give it a couple of months, and yeah, I will have this thing on like multiple times a week because it is so cozy. It's so nice. It's just a little too messy to wear out of the house, but that's fine. I'm happy to keep it just for me. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. That was kind of a fun trip down memory lane, even though it was a lot of complaining about bad knitting I've done. It was nice to see kind of where I've been before and to see like mistakes that I've made in my past that I would not be caught dead making today. And that really the only way for me to even get to that point was to make those mistakes in the past. So, you know, as annoying as some of these fails were, I'm glad that I made them ultimately because they turned me into the knitter that I am today. But yeah, so hopefully you don't have any terrible sins hiding in your closet like I do. But if you do, definitely leave them down below. I would love to see some of your horrific creations now that I've shared all of mine with the world. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll be back next week with a regular podcast episode. And yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and want to see more of them like that in the future, then go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see y'all next week. Bye.